Hi everyone, I am Chrissy, and today I am here to give you a little overview of Agile so that when you enter the tech industry and your first position as a software developer, you kind of have a good idea of what to expect on a software team. A big question is, what is Agile? So Agile is pretty much a set of values and principles that were put together by a group of developers in 2001 to help streamline the software development process. So up until that point, software development, it took forever. It had very little wiggle room for changes, and by the time this software was released, it was pretty much irrelevant because other teams had beat them to the market, so it was outdated by the time it got there. So that didn't work for anyone. So in 2001, these developers, they came together and they said, how can we make this better? What can we do? Let's put our collective brains together and figure out something. So from that meeting, they ended up forming the Agile Manifesto. Anything else you're interested in learning about that one, you can just simply Google what is the Agile Manifesto. But there are 4 key principles that they really were strongly or felt strongly about. So those principles and values are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to changes over following a plan. So these are broken down into 2 different sides. On the left side is the ones that were created in the Agile Manifesto, and these were the current processes up until that point that were in place. When they came up with these, it wasn't to say that the items on the left that they weren't important, it was just that they value the things on the right more. And you can definitely look into this further on the Agile Manifesto website or just Google it. It's lots of information there about it. Pretty much what that means is they value the team over having lots of processes and tools to do things. So a lot of the time there's a term called waterfall project management, where it was like you need to have everything figured out in the beginning, like you can't miss a step, and if anything does like happen, which it does, like projects change frequently, like that's the whole thing about them, you weren't able to adapt as quickly. The Agile Manifesto focuses on the people and the interactions over the processes and tools. That is kind of like, you'll figure that out as you go along the way. Like you'll come up with processes that work for you all, and you'll find tools to work with you, etc. When they say working software, the goal is to have something to deliver at the end of a sprint, at the end of whatever the iteration is, have some type of working software to show the stakeholders sooner than later, as opposed to having all this documentation that you have to write up and everything needs to be to the T. It's better to have something working than not have anything at all. And then customer collaboration is important, because if you have a good feedback loop with your customer or your client, then things run more smoothly and you're able to figure out what things need to be changed sooner than later. So with the waterfall methodology, it was kind of just like, here's everything we think we want right now in the beginning of the project, but things change and you should be agile enough to adapt to that. So we're saying that client collaboration is more important than contract negotiation and having all that stuff figured out in the beginning. And then you also need to be able to respond to changes faster. So that's one of the key values, in my opinion, to Agile, is being able to get some new information and build according to that new information. Think of Agile as a deck of cards. And then there are frameworks within Agile that are kind of like how you would take a deck of cards and you can play different games with them. So you could play poker with a deck of cards. You can play spades and go fish and all of those things with this one deck of cards. It's the same deck, but it can work in different ways. So that's kind of what the Agile frameworks are. So one of the most important is Scrum. The idea of a Scrum or Scrum team, it comes from the idea of this formation that rugby players would create when they were restarting a position or a play. So how they would get together so that they can kind of execute these plays and so forth. It's pretty much a position in rugby that they would use and they would get in this formation and things would go better. So Scrum is pretty much like, you want to be agile, you want to be quick, you need to be able to respond to changes, etc. That's one framework. So within this one framework of Scrum, you have a Scrum team. So a typical Scrum team consists of a product owner, a Scrum master, and the development team. And that development team also includes your QA testers. So what the product owner does is they pretty much work with the business stakeholders, so your client or whoever's the internal person in charge of whatever project team you're working on. And they work with this team or the business stakeholders to prioritize what work is going to be done. So they work with them, and then they come back to the development team and they present a set of prioritized tasks and items. So then you have your Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master is pretty much, you can think of it as like a team leader. So the Scrum Master is in place to keep the team focused on their goals for that sprint, and they also work to remove impediments for the team. So if there's something that's blocking you on your work, the Scrum Master is there to communicate with the product owner and kind of remove these things that are blocking you. And then the dev team, of course, develops the product, and they work with QA. So this development team is very loose. So it includes everyone that's development, your web developers, your mobile developers, QA, design, all of that can fit under the umbrella of development team. Sprint planning happens at the beginning of every new sprint. So every time a sprint ends, a new sprint planning begins, essentially. So during this time, the whole team, that's your product owner, your Scrum Master, and the development team come together, and they look at the backlog, which is the list of tasks that the product owner has prioritized, and they review what's left in the backlog, and they create estimates. And then you also have your daily stand-up. So essentially what stand-up is the whole team comes together for 15 minutes, and everyone goes around and says what you completed yesterday, what your plan is to work on today, or what you're planning on working on today, and if you have any blocker. Then you have your sprint review. So at the end of your sprint, when you've completed your task for that allotted, let's say 2 weeks, you get everyone in the room. So this is your specific team, plus the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the business stakeholders. So everyone comes together, and someone from the Scrum team is going to demo or show the stakeholders what you've created over the last 2 weeks. Then finally, at the end of all of this, you've done your sprint review, and so then the team, just the development team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master come together, and you have a retrospective. And the goal of this meeting is just to kind of get together and talk about what went well over the last 2 weeks and what didn't go so well over the last 2 weeks. So those are the 4 primary sprint ceremonies that happen. There's another one of the frameworks is Kanban. So what Kanban is just a way to provide visibility and figure out the capacity of the team. So usually with Kanban, you have a board. That's like the essential thing to working in the Kanban framework is a board. So typically this board is broken into columns. So this, by the way, the board can either be a physical one or it can be a digital board. So the board is broken down into different categories, 3 to 4. So you have your to-do column, and then you have in progress, and you could have, if you want to, depending on your team, you could have a peer review ready or a QA ready column, and then done. That's the last column. So it's a way to visually see where everyone is on the team, and it's easy to spot out if there's some type of bottleneck or there's a blocker. Then you can easily see what's going on. You can bring it up in your daily stand-up, or you can bring it up directly to your Scrum Master, whatever the case. But essentially, you have your product owner still. They're still prioritizing that list of tasks, and at the end of each, whenever you're delivering your work, at the end of that, you're looking at the backlog again, and you're pulling in tasks And each person on the team, on the development team, is going to pick a task and they're going to move it over to do. And then as they move it to do and they finish it up, or they're going to pick it up from to do and move it to in progress. And then when it's done, it's moved over to done. And that's how you kind of see, it kind of gives you the same thing as Scrum, but instead of points, you just visually see what the velocity is, how, like, what is the work in progress, how long is it taking things to move from the in progress column to done. And that's another thing you'll learn on the job is what is your team's definition of done. That's very important because done is like, what's considered done? Is it just like the development work is complete, or is it that it has been tested and everything, it's been reviewed? Is that done? So that's something you'll figure out amongst your team. So those are two of the most popular Agile frameworks. And there are a ton of other ones like Extreme Programming, which is also known as XP. There's Crystal Clear. There's at the like enterprise level, there's like SAFE, and a bunch of other ones. So you can definitely look into those to get an idea, but this was just a brief overview. Now you know a little bit more about Agile and its frameworks. It's fairly simple. Like working in Agile is great because it allows you the freedom to self-manage yourself. So what does self-management mean? It means that you know what you're doing and what's expected of you. So when you're in sprint planning or you're pulling items from the backlog, you're accountable to yourself and your team. So you're expected not to take on more than you can complete within the time frame or within the sprint. And so however you decide to get that work done, that's completely up to you. But your primary goal is to get it done and not block anyone else on the team. So there's not a lot of oversight. And if you do run into, like we all run into problems, so if anything comes up, you're expected to explain this in stand up, that you have a blocker, or to take it to your scrum master for help if it's something bigger than that. But inside of those constraints, you can kind of make your way and wiggle around however you see fit. It's really great, and there's a lot of communication when you're working on one of these teams. And it's great to see the evolution of the work that you're creating within any of these frameworks, like how it's going out, what it looks like, what's the feedback that you're getting from the people that will be using your product or your software at the end of this. Like the loop is continuous. It just keeps going. There's no blockages there. I mean, sometimes there's blockages, but they're not too big where you can't get over them. So that was just my quick overview of what Agile looks like, what is Scrum, what is Kanban, and what you can expect joining a team when you enter the tech industry. I encourage everyone to look into these values, principles, frameworks, everything on your own. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me in Slack or any of the avenues available to you. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing what you do. Good luck.